Okay, in this problem, Angela, a biologist, spends summers on an island in Alaska for several summers. She studied puffins. 2 summers ago, Angela captured, tagged, and released 20 puffins. This past summer, she captured 50 puffins and found that 2 of them were tagged. Using Angela's findings, estimate the number of puffins on the island and explain. Okay, so let's just step back for a moment and understand this whole concept of tagging to estimate a population. So assume for a moment, of course, puffins are birds, by the way, right? They're really quite cute. Here's one right here and here. Well, assume for a moment that we know the number of puffins on an island, and there are 10 of them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? 10 birds, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. I drew 12 though. No, I didn't. That's 10. Okay. So that's 10 birds on an island. Now we're sitting there, we're watching the 10 birds, and a scientist comes along and tags these 1, 2 birds. Now they don't know how many birds are on the island, but then they leave, right? They leave and come back a couple of weeks later. Now when they come back, this time they decide, let's collect 5 random birds, and that's part of the key here, that we have a random collection. So we happen to grab these 5. So we randomly grab 5. And what will they find? Well, what they'll find is that in the 5 that they grabbed, right, out of those 5, one of them, 1 out of 5, was tagged. So they can use that inference to figure out the total population. They can say, oh, well, 1 out of 5 was tagged. We know that we tagged 2. So how many birds should there be in this population? If they solve this proportion, they can see that 1 over 5 is the same thing as 2 over 10. And they would correctly infer that 10 is the total number of birds. Now the key here is that this process is an estimation tool. And I think you can see why estimation is definitely the key. First of all, even if we go for a short time, certain numbers of birds will be born and die, right? That will change. And also, your random sampling might not work out so perfectly, right? If they had come back and grabbed maybe 5 birds who did not have any tags, right? How would they use that to figure out the total number of population? Because then you'd say, oh, none of them are tagged out of the 5 I grabbed, right? And I tagged 2. What would that be out of? Well, you can't solve this because then here this is 0. And this would be 0 equals 2 over x, and it'd be this whole mess because x can't equal anything, right? 2 divided by, well, there's nothing you can divide 2 by to get 0, right? You can't divide by 0, and you're in the situation that you can't solve. So, I mean, there's a whole bunch of random factors. Of course, the goal is to tag more than 2 birds because, first of all, those 2 could die, and to take a random sample of more than 5. To avoid these problems, the goal is that your sample is large enough, and this is where it gets tricky, of course, but you want to make a sample large enough so that you can avoid the obvious pitfalls and problems. But even with the most well-designed experiment, this is still an estimation, right? Things will always be slightly off. But with that in mind, we have a ratio that we can use to make an estimation. And it won't be as clean as this with the 10 birds here, but it's close. Because we know we have 50 puffins, right? It says 50 puffins, and right when we captured those 50 puffins, we found that 2 of them were tagged. Well, we're assuming if this is proportional to the total population, we know that there are 20 tagged in total, right? So how many puffins would there be if 20 were tagged? Well, if it's proportional to the 2 that we tagged out of 50, then we can solve for x. I would multiply both sides by 20 perhaps, or just realize that, oh, the 2 that I tagged, the 20 that I tagged originally, now, right, in this group, if I divide by 10, I get 2. So here I can ask myself, what do I have to divide by 10 to get 50? Well, that's 500. If I have 500 puffins in total and divide that by 10, I'll get 50 puffins. It's just one way of solving this proportion. And then I would say, oh, the number of puffins is equal to 500. And again, the assumption is that the 20 you tagged, right, that you're grabbing a group of random here, a random group of 50, and you happen to find that 2 of them are tagged. So you're assuming that you can scale that up by a factor of 10 to represent the total population. So notice here, they're not grabbing 5 puffins, but 50. It's a better sampling, although it's still imperfect. But again, the whole process of looking at populations is an imperfect science anyway, because again, even with the most accurate tools, at every moment, a bird is being born or dying. And the larger the population, the less inaccurate this process becomes. So it's okay that we're estimating. But I just wanted you to think about the basic model and idea, and that's up here, I think, for me at least, in this small group. So, and again, when you're given a problem like this, and you're like, how do I do it? Try and create a smaller picture of what's happening to make sense of it. All right, thanks.